At 78, David Letterman finally tells the truth about Johnny Carson. David Michael Letterman was born on April 12, 1947 in Indianapolis, Indiana, into a working-class family that knew more about survival than show business. His father, Harry Joseph Letterman, was a florist who struggled to keep his small flower shop afloat while battling heart disease. His mother, Dorothy Marie, worked as a church secretary to help make ends meet. Growing up in the modest neighborhood of Broad Ripple, Letterman developed his sharp wit, not on stage but at the dinner table, where humor was the only currency that cost nothing. He attended Ball State University, studying radio and television, and initially believed his future lay in traditional broadcasting. After graduation in 1969, he landed a job as a weatherman at WLWI television in Indianapolis. But fate had other plans. Letterman was fired for treating weather forecasts as comedy segments, once congratulating a tropical storm on being upgraded to a hurricane. That dismissal in 1974 should have been devastating. Instead, it became the push he needed. Working shifts at an Atlas supermarket to pay bills, he spent nights writing comedy material, studying every comedian who appeared on television, particularly one man who seemed to rule late night with an effortless charm that made millions feel like they were in on the joke. In 1975, with less than $2,000 in savings and a station wagon filled with everything he owned, Letterman drove to Los Angeles. He had no connections, no agent, and no plan beyond a desperate need to perform. He started at the Comedy Store, grinding through late-night sets for audiences that were often more drunk than attentive. He wrote for game shows like The Gong Show and The $20,000 Pyramid, learning the mechanics of television while quietly developing his own subversive style. His first real break came with a short-lived NBC morning show in 1980, a 90-minute experiment that the network killed after just 4 months. Critics called it too weird for morning television. Letterman called it an education in what networks feared. But there had been an earlier moment, one that changed everything. On November 26, 1978, Letterman made his first appearance on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. He was terrified to the point of physical illness. His set started rough, with jokes landing in silence. Then, from his desk, Carson gave him something invaluable, a small smile and a gesture to continue. That tiny encouragement transformed the remaining 4 minutes. The audience warmed, the laughs came, and when Letterman walked off stage, Carson was waiting. "You'll be back," Carson said simply. It wasn't a question. Over the next 4 years, Letterman appeared on The Tonight Show 48 times, each appearance building an unspoken understanding between the veteran king and the nervous prince. Carson began dropping hints to NBC executives, subtle at first, then more direct. He saw something in Letterman that reminded him of his younger self. The Midwestern sensibility, the intelligent absurdity, the ability to find humor in the mundane. The turning point in David Letterman's career came on February 1, 1982, when NBC gave him Late Night with David Letterman, the 12:30 a.m. slot directly following The Tonight Show. It was Carson's doing, though he never said so publicly. The show revolutionized comedy television with stupid pet tricks, Velcro suits, and top 10 lists that became cultural phenomena. Letterman threw things off tall buildings, baited celebrity guests with uncomfortable questions, and turned awkwardness into an art form. By 1985, he was winning Emmys, and Letterman was being called the future of late night. Everyone assumed the succession was clear. When Carson retired, Letterman would inherit the Tonight Show throne. It seemed destined, inevitable, written in the stars. Then came May 1991, and the announcement that shattered that destiny. Johnny Carson declared he would retire in 1 year. The battle for his throne began immediately, but it wasn't supposed to be a battle at all. Behind the scenes, Carson had made his preference known to close confidants. He wanted Letterman. He'd been grooming him for 13 years. But NBC executives led by Warren Littlefield saw things differently. They worried Letterman was too edgy, too ironic for 11:30. They wanted Jay Leno, the safe choice, the comedian who worked clean and never made executives nervous. On June 6, 1991, NBC announced that Jay Leno would be the next host of The Tonight Show. Letterman learned about it from a reporter calling for comment. The betrayal cut deep, not from Leno, but from the network that had ignored Carson's wishes. What the public didn't know was that Carson himself was furious. Letterman's personal life during his rise was far more complicated than his gap-toothed grin suggested. His first marriage to Michelle Cook, whom he'd wed in 1968 before fame found him, dissolved in 1977 under the pressure of his obsessive focus on career. She later described him as a man who lived for the approval of strangers while struggling to connect with those closest to him. The loneliness that followed led him into a darkness he rarely discussed publicly. By the mid-1980s, at the height of his NBC success, Letterman was drinking heavily, not socially but alone in his home after tapings, trying to quiet what he later called the voice that told him he was never good enough. The alcohol became his co-host off-camera, reliable and destructive in equal measure. In 1986, he met Regina Lasco, a production manager on his show. Their relationship would span decades and scandal, including a very public revelation in 2009 of affairs with female staffers and a blackmail attempt that forced Letterman to confess his infidelities on air. Through it all, Regina stayed. They finally married in 2009. But the real change in Letterman's life had come 6 years earlier with the birth of their son, Harry Joseph Letterman, named after David's late father. Becoming a father at 56 transformed him in ways success never could. Suddenly, the approval that mattered most came from a toddler who didn't care about ratings. In 2005, a kidnapping plot targeting Harry was uncovered and stopped by authorities. During that terrifying period, Letterman received a call he never expected. Johnny Carson, already ill with emphysema, reached out privately to offer support. It was one of their last conversations. After losing The Tonight Show to Leno, Letterman moved to CBS in 1993 for The Late Show with David Letterman, where he would spend the next 22 years competing directly against the job he'd always wanted. He won the time slot battle for years, but the victory felt hollow. The worst part was that Carson agreed. In rare interviews after retirement, Carson made subtle digs at Leno's Tonight Show while sending Letterman jokes for his monologue, a gesture that was both supportive and heartbreaking. It was the father approving of the son who didn't get the inheritance. Away from cameras, Letterman found solace at his 2,700-acre ranch in Montana, a place that reminded him of Carson's own Nebraska roots. Both men, despite their fame, remained Midwestern boys who found peace in vast spaces far from studio lights. The ranch became Letterman's sanctuary, where he could fish, hike, and avoid the very fame he'd spent decades chasing. But even there, Carson's influence lingered. In 2000, when Letterman underwent quintuple bypass surgery, one of the first calls he received during recovery was from Carson. They talked for an hour, not about comedy or television, but about mortality, fear, and the strange journey that had brought two Indianapolis and Norfolk boys to the pinnacle of American entertainment. Carson shared his own health struggles, the emphysema that was slowly killing him, though neither man acknowledged the inevitable directly. At 78, David Letterman has finally chosen to speak openly about the relationship that defined his career and the truths he's kept hidden for decades. The silence wasn't out of disrespect, but out of something deeper, a fear that his words might somehow diminish the man he'd idolized since childhood. Growing up in Indianapolis, young Dave would sneak out of bed to watch The Tonight Show on the family's black and white television. His father, dying of heart disease, would sometimes join him. Those late nights, father and son watching Carson together, became David's last good memories before his father passed when David was just 27. Carson wasn't just a comedian to Letterman. He was the possibility of escape, proof that a Midwestern boy could matter to millions. That childhood worship turned into adult reverence when Letterman finally met Carson in 1978. He expected Hollywood arrogance. Instead, he found a shy man from Nebraska who understood the burden of being desperately funny while feeling desperately alone. The truth that Letterman reveals now, after years of careful deflection, centers on a series of private meetings that took place in 1991 and 1992 at Carson's Malibu home. These weren't social visits, they were strategy sessions. Carson, Letterman confirms, was actively trying to influence NBC's decision from behind the scenes. He made calls to executives, had lunch with network president Robert Wright, and even considered going public with his preference. During one meeting in December 1991, Carson told Letterman directly, "You're the only one who understands what this thing really is." By this thing, he meant the particular alchemy of The Tonight Show, the ability to be funny while making America feel comfortable. to be subversive while seeming safe. Carson believed Leno, for all his work ethic and likability, didn't have that complexity. He was a comedian who told jokes. Letterman was a broadcaster who created moments. The most painful revelation comes from their final meeting in early 1992, just weeks before NBC's announcement. Carson, usually composed, was visibly angry. He told Letterman that the network had essentially told him his opinion was appreciated but irrelevant. They'd already decided on Leno, had probably decided months earlier. The meeting ended with Carson saying something that haunted Letterman for decades. "I'm sorry I couldn't do more. I failed you." But the deeper truth Letterman shares isn't about corporate politics or broken promises. It's about what Carson revealed during their last real conversation, just days before Carson died on January 23, 2005. Carson called Letterman at home, his voice weakened by emphysema, but his mind sharp. They talked about the old days, about mistakes and triumphs. Then Carson said something that changed Letterman's understanding of everything. "You know what the biggest joke is?" Carson asked. "Everyone thought I had it all figured out. The truth is, I was just as lost as everyone else. The show was the only place I made sense. When I walked away from it, I walked away from the only version of myself I actually liked." He told Letterman about the loneliness that fame brings, how you become a character even to your own family, how 3 divorces weren't failures of relationship but failures to exist as a real person outside the spotlight. Carson's final advice was devastating in its simplicity. "Don't wait as long as I did to figure out who you are without the audience." Letterman admits now that this conversation broke something in him. He'd spent 40 years trying to become Johnny Carson, only to learn that Johnny Carson had spent 30 years trying to escape being Johnny Carson. The guilt Letterman carries isn't just about losing The Tonight Show. It's about something deeper. He believes he let Carson down by not fighting harder, by not going public with Carson's support, by choosing to avoid conflict rather than claim what his mentor wanted him to have. But more than that, he feels guilty for repeating Carson's mistakes. Like Carson, Letterman let the show become his identity. Like Carson, he sacrificed marriages and relationships for laughs from strangers. Like Carson, he discovered too late that the thing he was chasing was actually chasing him away from any chance at genuine happiness. When Letterman retired in 2015, he did what Carson never could. He grew a beard, gained weight, and became unrecognizable as the gap-toothed comedian America knew. The Netflix show My Next Guest Needs No Introduction isn't really about the guests. It's Letterman's attempt to finally be himself, to have conversations instead of performances. In 2022, he reconciled with Jay Leno, not because the wound healed, but because holding the grudge felt like carrying Carson's anger forward. The ranch in Montana has become more than a retreat. It's where Letterman is learning to exist without punchlines, to be a father to Harry without the armor of celebrity, to be the person Carson warned him to find before it was too late. The final truth Letterman shares is the most painful. Johnny Carson died believing he'd failed his protege, and Letterman lived believing he'd failed his mentor. Both men were wrong. They didn't fail each other. They were failed by an industry that treats authenticity as weakness and vulnerability as liability. Carson wanted Letterman to succeed him not because he was the funniest, but because he was the most human, the most capable of using comedy to reveal rather than conceal truth. That Letterman lost The Tonight Show might have been the tragedy of his career, but it also freed him to eventually become something Carson never could. Himself, flawed and real, no longer hiding behind the gap-toothed grin. At 78, David Letterman doesn't tell the truth about Johnny Carson to settle scores or claim vindication. He tells it because he finally understands what Carson was trying to teach him in that last conversation. The show ends. The audience goes home, and what remains is the person you are when the cameras stop rolling. Carson never figured out who that person was. Letterman, late in life but not too late, finally has. The truth is that Johnny Carson didn't just want David Letterman to host The Tonight Show. He wanted him to avoid the trap that The Tonight Show had become for its host, a golden cage where you perform happiness while forgetting what actual happiness feels like. In failing to give Letterman the show, perhaps Carson inadvertently gave him something more valuable, the chance to eventually walk away whole. How different would late-night television be if Carson had gotten his way? Let us know in the comments. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful Hollywood journeys.